Welcome to 6 Degrees of Wiki, a podcast where two sisters find the 6 degrees of separation between Wikipedia articles that don't seem to have anything in common. I'm Rosanna.
And I'm Nikki. Today we'll fall into a Wikipedia spiral where we have just 6 rounds to figure out how the first degree could possibly be connected to the last, while learning all sorts of peculiar facts along the way. Let's get started. Today we were spiraling from Jeff Goldblum to necromancy.
Ooh. Yay! I love both of those things.
I chose Jeff Goldblum as a starting degree because it's Jeff Goldblum. I mean,
We all love him.
he's amazing.
He is.
We do. And we all forgot about him for a while, and then he was in Thor Ragnarok, and we're like, oh, that's right. We love him.
We do
Now
love
we
him.
just want Jeff Goldblum everything.
Yep.
And, I mean, necromancy, that's just cool.
Yeah.
I mean, not real necromancy, because that's creepy, but the
Right, of
idea
course.
of it.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Rosanna, what do you think about these degrees?
I, like many other people, am also obsessed with Jeff Goldblum. I love him. I also perform necromancy in my spare time. So, there you go.
If Jeff Goldblum dies, will you try to resurrect him?
Yeah, obviously, that'd be literally the first thing I would do.
Round 1. Jeff Goldblum is an American actor and jazz musician. Necromancy is the practice of magic involving communication with the dead, either by summoning their spirit as an apparition or raising them bodily.
Ew.
Shanna, do you see anything these items have in common?
I do.
Oh, what?
Jeff Goldblum is a wizard, and necromancy is performed by wizards. No, I'm just kidding. But actually, what I do see in common is that necromancy isn't real, and so I think a lot of fiction...
Neither is Jeff Goldblum?
No, Jeff Goldblum is absolutely real. Necromancy pops up in fiction, and Jeff Goldblum is an actor, so his job is fiction. So I feel like that has to be the line between them.
Okay, that seems reasonable.
Thank you.
So let's learn more about Jeff Goldblum.
Okay.
For one thing, it's really hard to tell if his last name is pronounced Goldblum or Goldblum.
Oh.
According to the guide on how to pronounce names, I still cannot tell you which one is correct. Because it has BLU:M. I don't know what colon means in the middle of a name when it's about pronunciation.
I
And
don't know.
did not look it up.
Okay.
And there was an interview not too long ago where they asked him which way to pronounce it, and he totally avoided the question.
Oh.
So, it's very mysterious, just like Jeff Goldblum.
I would say that sounds exactly like how he would answer that.
It really is. So, Jeffrey Lynn Goldblum was born October 2nd, 1952. He's an actor and musician. He is 66 right now. Interesting fact about Jeff Goldblum. His Wikipedia page does not talk about how dreamy he is,
Oh.
nor about how quirky he is.
Oh.
It doesn't really capture the essence of Goldblum. The way that we all feel is obvious when we see him.
Yes.
It's really hard to capture that in text.
I feel like, though, it would be easy to capture in a cologne called Essence of Goldblum.
Eau de Goldblum. I think you're right. I think that we need some sort of cologne
We need an Ian Malcolm cologne.
of Jeff. And I feel like that'd be like overly musky
I feel like it would smell like sweat and reptiles.
and sandalwood
And sandalwood.
and a little bit of iron for the blood.
Oh,
Because
yes.
he's
Yep.
injured. So if you weren't sure, listeners, he was in Jurassic Park, which is one of his movies. He's been in several very famous movies. Invasion of the Body Snatcher, The Big Chill. He first came to the attention of wider audiences in 1986 when he was in The Fly, and he got a Saturn Award for Best Actor. Later, like quite a bit later, about 10 years, he was in really, really high-grossing films like Jurassic Park and Independence Day, and their sequels as well. More recently, like I said, he was in Thor Ragnarok, where he played the Grand Master, and he was just the Jeff Goldblumiest Jeff Goldblum that ever did Jeff Goldblum in that movie.
Yeah, I feel like there wasn't a lot of acting involved in his scenes.
Yeah. It's just him.
He was
with
just him.
Some extra makeup on.
Yes.
And when he played piano in that movie, that was him actually playing. He is a jazz pianist. He also does vocals. He is in a musical group called Jeff Goldblum and the Mildred Schnitzer Orchestra. He has homes in LA and New York City. He's been married 3 times. He was first married to Patricia Gall from 1980 to 1986. So right when he started getting famous, they divorced. She was an actress. He was married to Gina Davis, 1987 to 1990.
I forgot about that.
And then in 2014, he married Canadian Olympic gymnast Emily Livingston. And they have 2 kids together.
Aww.
He waited a while to have kids. He was over 60 when he had both of his children.
Holy moly.
He was born and raised in West Homestead in Pennsylvania. His family is Jewish, and they immigrated from Russia and Austria. His parents are both slightly involved in show business-ish. His mom was a radio broadcaster who later ran a sales company that sold kitchen equipment and appliances.
Okay.
So a big change in career.
Yeah.
His dad was a doctor, but he considered studying acting when he was in school before he decided on medicine.
Oh, he considered it, so yeah.
Yes.
He's definitely part of show business.
The article said it like it was important, and I thought, that's a stretch there, but okay, Wikipedia, I'll take it.
Yeah, I would agree that's a stretch.
Goldblum moved to New York City when he was just 17 to become an actor.
Wow.
He worked on the stage first, and he studied acting at the renowned Neighborhood Playhouse under the guidance of acting coach Sanford Meisner. And he made his Broadway debut in the musical Two Gentlemen of Verona, which was a Tony Award-winning musical. Now, this article was shorter than I expected for someone who was so famous, so recognizable.
And a man.
I only have a single... Yeah, yes. I only have one interesting fact about Jeff Goldblum, and that is that in July 2018, a 25-foot statue of Jeff Goldblum was created and put in a little meadow next to London's Tower Bridge to mark the 25 years of Jurassic Park. And yes, it did recreate the moment in Jurassic Park when he was reclining with his shirt open. It was massive. It's also slightly terrifying to see pictures of it. It doesn't quite capture his face, and his body proportions are not quite right. It's a little weird looking, but it's huge.
First time I ever saw that picture was when I was looking for a picture of Jeff Goldblum to use as a Slack emoji, which was today.
Yeah, it's quite a statue.
It's something.
It's very obviously airbrushed. It's kind of weirdly painted.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't in that position, you wouldn't know it was him.
You should look up this picture because it's creepy. Round 2. All right, Rosanna, what's the next degree between Jeff Goldblum and necromancy? How are we going to get there?
One of the things you said seems like it's very much connected to necromancy.
Oh.
However, it seems like we're too far away from it for this to be the case.
Okay.
So I was going to guess Invasion of the Body Snatchers, necromancy, body snatcher. Let's stick on the fiction track and go with actor.
Actor. That is
Specific.
Very vague. Okay. Your guess of actor is incorrect.
Oh, weird.
The next degree is The Fly, the 1986 film.
Yeah, that was a gross movie.
Did you ever see it?
I've seen parts of it, and all the parts I saw were gross, so I never watched the whole thing.
I have never seen it, but now I feel like I know enough about it that I never need to see it.
There's so much, like, skin with, like, goop on it.
And all that gross goopy stuff won awards because of the makeup. So The Fly was a 1986 American science fiction body horror film. It was directed and co-written by David Cronenberg. It stars Jeff Goldblum, Gina Davis, and John Getz. It's loosely based on George Langeland's 1957 short story, also called The Fly. And it's the story of an eccentric scientist who has an experiment that goes wrong, and he slowly turns into a fly-human hybrid creature.
Mm-hmm.
It was released on August 15th, 1986. Massive acclaim by critics and audiences, mostly about the special effects and Goldblum's acting. It made $60.6 million at the box office.
Wow.
Which is amazing considering it only cost $9 million to make.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it did really well. It won an Academy Award for Best Makeup. It has a 92% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Really?
Yep, and they made a sequel in 1989, which did not star Jeff Goldblum.
No, and probably didn't make $60 million.
No. So I'm going to give you the plot, which is super gross. So, we've got Seth Brundle, who's played by Jeff Goldblum. He's a scientist. He meets a woman named Veronica Ronnie Quaife. She's a science journalist. He shows her his invention, which is a set of telepods. It allows teleportation from one pod to another. And they can transport inanimate objects, but they mutilate the tissues of animate objects, which you find out when he demonstrates it on a baboon and it's turned inside out.
Ew.
Yeah. Brundle and Quaife start a romantic relationship. As you do right after you see a baboon turned inside out. Why not?
It's very romantic.
And they have a misunderstanding, which leads Brundle to fix the machine and use it on himself. But there's a fly inside the pod with him that he doesn't know about. Now, at first, there doesn't seem to be anything amiss. However, he starts to show increased strength and stamina and sexual potency, which he thinks is because of the teleportation purifying his body.
Mm-hmm.
Then he starts to have sugar cravings and grow bristly hair from his back. Also, he starts to have violent outbursts. So then he does some research and he figures out that the telepod computer was confused by the presence of two life forms in the sending pod and fused him with the fly at the molecular genetic level. That is why he's having problems, which get much, much worse.
It's kind of like the nightmare version of Spider-Man.
It really, yeah.
Yeah.
Spider-Man just went really wrong.
Yeah.
So he starts losing body parts and vomiting digestive enzymes onto his food to dissolve it.
Ew. I think I've seen that part.
Yeah, he also gains the ability to cling to walls and ceilings. So, his girlfriend learns that she's pregnant.
Oh god, it's a fly, isn't it?
She has a nightmare of giving birth to a giant maggot.
Oh, gross.
Yeah. She tries to end the pregnancy, but he finds out. He kidnaps her and wants to do a teleportation with him and her and the unborn baby to fuse them all into one entity. I don't know why he thinks that's a good idea.
Because his brain is a brain of a fly?
I guess so.
Ugh.
She gets saved by another guy. Long story. Right as the teleportation starts, and right when that happens, Brundle, who is in one of the pods, starts to come out, but the teleportation has started, so he gets fused with the door of the pod. And then she takes a gun and shoots him out of mercy, because he's obviously not going to survive, and he's in huge pain. That's the plot.
Gross.
So, doesn't go so well for him. Let's talk about the making of the film. There were a ton of script issues. It was rewritten by a lot of people and did not do well. The people making it originally wanted David Cronenberg to direct it, but he was working on Total Recall. And the next director that they chose ended up losing a daughter in an accident on vacation, and he pulled out of the project. And at that point, Cronenberg was no longer associated with Total Recall. He left that project, and he took on The Fly with a condition that he was able to rewrite the script, which he did. Interesting fact about The Fly. It inspired an adaptation in the form of an opera.
What?
Which I would not have expected.
No. I mean, it's a tragedy, so I guess.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the line, "Be afraid, be very afraid"?
Yes.
That is from that movie. Ronnie, the girlfriend, says that. It was also used as the film's marketing tagline.
I didn't know that's where that came from.
Originally, the movie was seen by some critics as a cultural metaphor for AIDS. But Cronenberg said he actually intended it to be more general analogy for disease or terminal conditions like cancer or the aging process even.
Oh.
So still some sort of sickness. But I mean, that was the era when AIDS was becoming far more well known. There was a song written specifically for the movie called Help Me, which, as we know, is usually not a good idea to write a song specifically for a movie. Usually bad. The director didn't think it really worked with the film. So instead, they played it in the background of a scene in a bar. Because I guess get your money's worth.
I guess.
It wasn't even on the soundtrack.
Wow.
There are also several different cuts of the movie that you can watch. One including a monkey cat abomination.
No, thank you.
Yeah, it's human flies bad enough, but like monkey cat sounds worse somehow. I don't need to see that.
No.
Round 3.
Rosanna, what's the next degree between The Fly and Necromancy? Now that you're grossed out sufficiently.
All right. So necromancy is about dead bodies sometimes. And you know what's always found around dead bodies?
What?
Flies.
That's true.
My guess is flies.
Okay. You think I'm pulling a Rosanna here? Go from the fly to fly?
You know what? It would serve me right, except it would serve you wrong if I was right.
I can't even have a response to that. Your guess of flies is incorrect.
Nice try. You did not fake me out.
The next degree is David Cronenberg.
No, I didn't even have that written down.
David Cronenberg is a Canadian filmmaker, writer, and actor, born March 15th, 1943. So he's 75. He's one of the originators of what's commonly known as the body horror genre, with his films exploring visceral body transformations.
Are you saying body horror?
Yep, body horror.
Okay.
His films also have things like infection, intertwining of the psychological and the physical, and technology. In the beginning of his career, he explored these themes mostly through science fiction and horror films, like Scanners and Videodrome. He's appeared on several greatest director lists. He was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I thought this was interesting. His father was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and his mother was born in Toronto, but all of his grandparents are from Lithuania.
Oh.
Both sides. Yeah.
Huh.
Which is kind of a weird coincidence.
Yeah.
He has a keen interest, especially in college, in science. He studied botany and lepidopterology, which is the study of butterflies.
Oh.
But he eventually abandoned that and studied English instead.
Okay.
I know, yeah. But he started making films in college, and in 2014 he published his first novel called Consumed.
Oh.
He's been married twice, first to Margaret Hinson from 1970 to 1977, and then he married Carolyn Zeifman in 1979, and she died in 2017. They were married almost 40 years.
Wow.
Some films you might recognize of his, the more kind of high-budget films, were A History of Violence in 2005 and Eastern Promises in 2007, both starring Viggo Mortensen. Interesting fact about David Cronenberg. His films have won numerous awards, including, for the movie Crash, the Special Jury Prize at the 1996 Cannes Film Festival. And that Special Jury Prize is a really unique award, and it's not given annually. It's only given at the request of the official jury.
Oh.
Who gave it to him in this case, quote, for originality, for daring, and for audacity.
Wow.
That was in 1996. They haven't given out the award since.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Weird, interesting fact about David Cronenberg. At one stage, he was considered by George Lucas to direct Return of the Jedi.
Sure.
Yeah, he got passed over, but just the fact that he was
on the list.
Round 4.
Rosanna, what is the next degree between David Cronenberg and necromancy?
All right. Necromancy can sometimes, and by sometimes I mean usually, be scary, just like horror films. So my guess is horror.
Your guess of horror is half whole, right? I think, maybe?
Okay. Is it the body horror genre?
It is horror films, is the next degree.
I win.
I'm going to give it to you, because, yeah, I mean, horror is... Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you have that one?
I'll take it.
A horror film is a film that seeks to elicit fear and evoke viewers' nightmares. Also fear, revulsions, and terror of the unknown. It was initially inspired by books from authors like Edgar Allan Poe, Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, who we've talked about before. And it's been a film genre for more than a century. It sometimes overlaps with fantasy, supernatural fiction, and the thriller genres. Plots in the horror genre usually include some sort of evil force or event or person in your everyday world. Common elements in horror films include characters like ghosts, extraterrestrials, vampires and werewolves, demons, Satanism, evil clowns and witches, serial killers, and zombies.
Yuck.
There are a ton of subgenres of horror, like low-budget horror, comedy horror, found footage, and slasher films.
Okay.
Tell you a little bit about the history about horror films. In 1896, what is widely considered the first horror film was a short silent film, 3 minutes long, created by the French pioneer filmmaker Georges Méliès. It was called Les Manoirs du Diable, also known as The Haunted Castle or The House of the Devil.
Ugh.
And the same director made several other short films, now considered horror comedies. There's one called Une Nuit Terrible, which means a terrible night, which is the story of a man who tries to get a good night's sleep but ends up wrestling a giant spider. All I could think was Ron Weasley.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a nightmare for sure.
Yeah. Méliès went on to make 6 films, including The Faust Legend, where a guy makes a deal with the devil for unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures.
Yeah.
6 of those. 6 films with this concept.
Wow.
And even as far as the 1890s, they were already using special effects to try to invoke the supernatural in these films with pyrotechnics, double exposure, and scale manipulation. In 1908, we got our first film adaptation of a horror-based novel, and that was of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In 1920, we got Das Cabinet de Dr. Caligari, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Roger Ebert called it, quote, the first true horror film, and that introduced techniques like the twist ending and the unreliable narrator.
Ooh, I like the unreliable narrator.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Now, in the 1950s, the tone of horror films started to shift away from gothic and more toward contemporary concerns, including the very popular doomsday film genre.
Oh, yeah.
And we started to get Japan's experience with Hiroshima and Nagasaki when we got Godzilla, which was a mutation from the effects of radiation. In the 1960s, we got slasher films like Psycho, which we've covered before.
We have.
And in the 70s, we started to get psychological horror films with evil children and telepathy and insanity. We also got Stephen King book adaptations then. In the 1980s, we got some classic slasher films with serial killers. And in the 1990s, we got all of their sequels. So many sequels to all the slasher films. Just endless sequels. So many. The horror genre started declining, maybe because we kept getting the same stories over and over again.
Yeah.
But also because audiences also got interested in science fiction and fantasy because we started to get computer-generated imagery. So the special effects got way better.
Yeah.
And in the 2000s, we started getting lots of franchises like Final Destination, the Blade series, and parodies of horror movies like Shaun of the Dead, a classic, and more remakes and reboots. And in the 2010s, we got more psychological thrillers, but a really mixed bag of some subgenres of horror. Interesting fact about horror films, mostly about how it's changed, just the things that we're afraid of. So in 1897, there was a director named George Albert Smith, and he created the movie called X-Ray Fiend, which came out 2 years after X-rays were invented.
Oh.
And that showed a couple of skeletons courting each other, and an audience full of people who were not used to seeing bones because that was a new thing. They would have found it really frightening and otherworldly, when now that's funny.
Right.
Just seeing skeletons dance around because of technology changing so much. Just the things that we're afraid of are so different.
Yeah.
Round 5. All right, Rosanna, how do we get from horror film to necromancy?
I wrote down so many things.
There was a lot in there.
I wrote down nightmares, terror, Edgar Allan Poe, ghosts, witches, House of the Devil, doomsday, insanity. So
how will you choose?
I don't know. I think that ghosts would be a good guess, but I think we've covered ghosts before.
We have.
My second guess, I think I'm going to go with witches.
Witches.
Because I feel like often in a necromancy story, you need a witch or a wizard.
Your guess of witches is correct. Though I'm amazed you didn't go with zombie.
Oh, that's a good one too.
I saw that and I'm like, that's totally going to trip her up. Apparently it did not.
I didn't even write down zombies. I guess I got caught up on witches.
It's not just witches, it's actually witchcraft.
Right, okay.
But we'll go with that. So witchcraft, or witchery, generally means the practice of and belief in magical skills and abilities exercised by solitary practitioners and groups, like covens. And witchcraft often occupies a religious, divinatory, or medicinal role. Have a lot of women who were healers that were considered witches. So historically, witchcraft, the label witchcraft, has been applied to practices that people believe influence the mind, the body, or the property of others against their will. So generally not good.
Right.
It's been considered pretty evil, associated with the devil and devil worship. And it led to the increasing belief that Christianity was engaged in this just apocalyptical battle against the devil and his secret army of witches, which led to, in the 15th century, tens or hundreds of thousands of people executed for being witches, and plenty more imprisoned, tortured, and banished, and losing their lands. Now, modern witches and witchcraft, some ways different, some ways the same, at least in how they're seen. So you probably heard of Wicca. That's kind of our more modern witchcraft traditions that no longer really practice in secrecy like they used to, and not really being seen negatively in most cases. That being said, there are some cultures to this day that believe in the power of witchcraft and kill people suspected of witchcraft, including children that they use as scapegoats for things like deaths in the family that they think are because
oh my gosh, that's
these children
horrible.
are witches.
How could you possibly think that the children had anything to do with that?
Yeah, it's pretty ugly.
That's
Just
terrible.
kids that are just tortured in horrible ways.
Yeah, that's really dumb.
Yeah. In Tanzania, about 500 older women are murdered each year after they're accused of witchcraft.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. In Saudi Arabia, practicing witchcraft and sorcery is a crime punishable by death. The country has executed people for this as recently as 2014.
Wow.
And about 50 to 150 alleged witches are killed each year in Papua New Guinea.
Wow.
The belief that witches exist and are doing evil things isn't just bad for generally women. It's often an excuse for violence against women, in a lot of cases, but it can also have just really tragic healthcare consequences. In some regions of Central Africa, HIV and AIDS, the Ebola virus are two examples of infectious disease epidemics where just the treatment of them and reduction of them being passed in the first place are completely hampered because people believe they're caused by witchcraft and not scientific reasons.
Wow. That's
so because of
terrible.
this belief, it's getting passed around even more than it would, which is very sad. Interesting fact about witchcraft. In 1486, there was a book called Malleus Maleficarum, usually translated as Hammer of Witches. It outlines how to identify a witch, what makes a woman more likely than a man to be a witch.
Okay.
And it develops a detailed legal and theological theory. This theory mainly is just, you should torture people until they confess and then burn them at the stake.
Okay, yeah. Uh-huh.
It was a bestseller, second only to the Bible in sales for almost 200 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Condemned by the church, but still really did pretty well.
It was a bestseller.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yikes.
Round 6. Rosanna, this is your last chance to break the record. What is the next degree between witchcraft and necromancy?
I don't know. Nothing I wrote down seems like a reasonable guess. And you know, I always think that the last degree before the last degree should be the easiest one, but I don't know if I've ever gotten it right.
Yeah, it's tougher than I always expect.
So I'm going to tell you what I'm considering.
Okay.
I like covens. I like devil. I like...
Out of context, this is a disturbing conversation.
You mean like you should always go with Hitler? Yeah. I like Hammer of Witches. I like Ebola. Actually, no. Ebola wouldn't make any sense at all. That's not a good guess.
I mean, it's lethal.
Yeah, but does it have anything to do with necromancy? I think not. Well, I guess if you're gonna perform necromancy, maybe it's easier to do like in a squad setting. So I'm gonna guess covens.
It's a weird use of the word squad there.
A coven could be a
Maybe
squad.
we should be in the Lady Pod coven instead of...
Oh, I love that.
instead of Lady Pod squad.
Yeah, Lady Pod coven. I love it.
Your guess of coven is incorrect.
Oh.
The next degree is magic.
What? It's magic?
It's magic.
I feel like out of all people, I should have guessed magic.
I also feel that way, but I'm so glad you didn't because
I also don't remember you saying magic.
It was in the very first sentence I said.
Oh.
It's the practice of and belief in magical skills and abilities. So magic is surprisingly hard to define. In Western culture, it's a category where we've put lots of different beliefs and practices considered separate from religion and science. That's really the best definition you're going to get of magic. There's just huge disagreement and discussion between scholars, I'd love to be a scholar of magic, about what is considered magic, what should be included in the definition and what shouldn't be. And people just cannot agree at all. They've been debating what magic is for centuries. Nobody really agrees.
Yeah.
Throughout Western history, at least, there have been lots of different examples of people who engaged in practices their societies called magic. Sometimes they referred to themselves as magicians. In modern occultism, there are lots of self-described magicians and people who practice ritual activities they call magic. Generally, it's about bringing about changes in the physical world through the force of your will. As you can imagine, there's some pretty serious history about magic in lots of different cultures. In the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, the Persian Magus, or Majus, not quite sure how to pronounce that, they introduced the word into the ancient Greek language. When that happened, it kind of underwent a transformation of meaning and got negative connotations in it, where magos were regarded as charlatans with practices that were fraudulent and strange and dangerous. And the negative connotation continued for a very, very long time. In the 1st century BCE, early Christian writers like Augustine of Hippo, we've talked about, he said magic didn't just contain fraudulent and unsanctioned ritual practices. It was the very opposite of religion because it relied on cooperation from demons, and by extension, Satan. In medieval Europe, Christians often suspected Muslims and Jews of engaging in magical practices. And because of that, they did a lot of massacring of religious minorities, which is unfortunate. Those Christians really liked to cut down non-Christians back then.
Yeah. I mean, for a long time. That's like their MO.
In early modern Europe, the concept of magic became slightly more positive, and that's when they started thinking about the concept of natural magic. And that was a term introduced by 2 Italian humanists, Marsilio Ficcio and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. And for them, magic was an elemental force that was in all natural processes, which was completely and fundamentally distinct from the mainstream Christian ideas of demonic magic. And that's when we kind of started to get the idea of like the white witch and black magic.
Right.
Those being 2 very separate things.
Yeah.
Around that same time, Protestants often tried to denigrate Roman Catholic sacramental and devotional practices as being magical rather than religious. As a former Catholic who has seen the rituals in Catholic Mass of turning a small piece of bread into the body of Christ and some wine into the blood of Christ, I can see how people would consider that magic.
Well, yeah.
Rather than actual religious ceremony.
Yeah.
Does seem pretty magical. In the early 19th century, the newly independent Haitian government began to suppress the practice of voodoo.
Oh.
And they called it sorcery and witchcraft, saying it was all conducted with harmful intent, even though the voodoo practitioners already had a name completely separating regular good voodoo magic from harmful magic, and they called it magi. It was its own category of harmful voodoo, so they already had the kind of black and white magic thing.
Right.
Interesting fact about magic, really just the different names in different languages for sorcerers and people that practice magic I thought were kind of cool. In French, they called it sorcière. In German, it was hexe. In Italian, strega. In Spanish, you've probably heard bruja.
Yeah.
And the English term for malevolent practitioners of magic, or witch, was derived from the Old English term Wicca. WICCE, which obviously is where we got Wicca.
Yeah.
The current name. And that brings us to necromancy, which is the practice of magic involving communication with the dead. And that can be just by summoning the spirit of the dead, or actually raising physical bodies of the dead. And sometimes in more modern interpretations, it was to basically raise kind of zombie armies.
In theory.
Yeah. But most of the time, they did it to try to divine the future and find out.
Oh, yeah.
Like secrets of life and all that.
Because people
discover
that
hidden knowledge.
had died knew more than the people that were still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they still did try to use them as weapons sometimes, but that wasn't.
I mean, there's always
like
somebody that's going to try to use something as a weapon. There's always going to be that guy.
So early necromancy most likely evolved from the concept of shamanism, where people called upon spirits or ghosts of their ancestors. Classical necromancers addressed the dead in, quote, a mixture of high-pitched squeaking and low droning.
Oh, I did not know that. That is very strange.
There are records of necromancy being practiced in ancient Egypt and Babylonia and Greece and Rome. So it was happening all over the place.
Wow, yeah.
The oldest literary account of necromancy is from Homer's story, The Odyssey. So Odysseus traveled to the underworld under the direction of Circe, and he tried to raise the spirits of the dead using spells that she had taught him. And the Odyssey described lots of different necromantic rituals, like rites that had to be performed around a pit with fire at nighttime. And Odysseus had to follow a really specific recipe, including the blood of sacrificial animals, that the ghosts were supposed to drink while he recited prayers to the ghosts and the gods of the underworld. And there were a lot of rituals surrounding necromancy, some very elaborate, involving magic circles, wands, talismans, incantations. Sometimes the necromancers surrounded themselves with aspects of the dead, like wearing the deceased's clothing or consuming foods that indicated lifelessness, like unleavened black bread or unfermented grape juice.
Oh, that's weird.
Some necromancers even mutilated and consumed corpses.
Oh, no,
as part of their rituals.
No, that's not okay.
Yeah. No, it's really not.
That's so gross.
And generally, necromancers preferred to summon recently departed people that had been dead less than a year. Now, sometimes they would try to summon the ghostly spirit if they had been dead longer than a year. Because really, you're just going to have a rotting, falling apart kind of zombie if you do it too late.
Yeah. Ugh.
Now, in popular culture, I'm sure you've heard of many things that included necromancy. Armies of zombies, heroes have to slay, show up all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of video games, like The Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, World of Warcraft, Magic the Gathering, Mortal Kombat movies, Dungeons and Dragons. You've probably heard of the movie Army of Darkness.
I have.
Where Ash has to fight this skeletal army raised by the Necronomicon, this book he's got.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it. I've heard of it. I did not know that that's what it was about, though.
Interesting fact about necromancy. So you had mentioned that the dead know more than the living, and that's why they summon them. So it really depends on the culture as to what they believe. Some cultures consider that the knowledge of the dead is unlimited. They can see all and they know all. But ancient Greeks and Romans thought shades only knew certain things. And I love this. Ovid wrote in his book Metamorphosis about a marketplace in the underworld where the dead got together to exchange news and gossip. And I love that concept. Isn't that cool? They're just getting around, all these old dead people sharing stories about what they know.
Yeah, that's funny.
There's also a book called The Munich Manual of Demonic Magic, which is a pretty mundane title for a 15th century grimoire that just has a ton of rituals on necromancy. Now, parts of it have been published. Its full translation into English has not been published, which makes me wonder what the Germans are trying to hide.
They're trying to hide how to raise people from the dead, obviously.
I approve of that, but not of censorship. So we've made it through all 6 degrees. We went from Jeff Goldblum, to The Fly, to David Cronenberg, to horror film, to witchcraft, to magic, to necromancy. Rosanna, what'd you think of The Spiral?
I thought The Spiral was delightful. Because it covered many things that I am interested in, but purely academically when it comes to necromancy. And I do love Jeff Goldblum. I'm so glad that he's gotten this sort of resurgence of popularity because he's just seems like such a cool guy.
Mm-hmm.
I bet he's really interesting to meet and just to, like, talk with.
Yeah.
I would like to meet him. That'd be super cool.
It is time for our whim of the week. This week, Rosanna is going to tell us about a book series that she has been reading.
And by reading, what you mean is listening to.
That's the same thing.
I'm sure I've mentioned before that I really, really like audiobooks, mostly because I can do other things while I'm reading, like driving and the dishes and that sort of thing. I just feel like I'm getting so much done at once, you know?
Yeah.
So I had an Audible credit, and I was trying to find something to read, and I couldn't find anything that just, like, really called to me in the categories I usually look at, which I'm sure you know are magic, time travel, you know, that kind of stuff. So I started to spread my search out a little bit, and I found this book called Superpowered's Year One. It's a book by Drew Hayes, and it's the first of a series of 4 books. Each one is called Superpowered's with the year. So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And I just found this out recently. So right now I'm almost finished with the second book. But when I looked up some information so I could talk about the series, I found out that Superpowered's was originally hosted as a web novel on Drew Hayes Novels website. And then they reformatted it to ebooks and then recorded them as audiobooks.
That's cool.
Yeah, so Drew Hayes has other book series also, but this is the only one I've read so far. And it's a very interesting idea. The story is about college students that they're going to a regular college, but this college has a program that trains heroes. The heroes are people that have superpowers. So It's a lot like, do you remember the movie Sky High?
No.
Okay, so the movie Sky High is superheroes' children in high school. And they go to a high school and everybody in the high school...
I don't think I ever saw that movie.
Oh, it's so good. You should totally watch it. But it's a high school for students that have superpowers. So this story is sort of like if those kids went to a regular college that had a superhero training program.
Okay.
It's definitely not a kid-appropriate story. It's got bad language and some adult situations, but it's sort of like The Incredibles kind of feeling. You know, it's like people that can do amazing things. And the whole point of this program, you start with a whole bunch of students in year 1, but by the time you get to year 4, I think only 10 students graduate and become actual working heroes. They go through all sorts of very rigorous training. I can see the montages in my head as I'm listening, of course. It's just a really interesting story. I've never read any books like this before. Very entertaining. The guy that does the audiobooks, the narrator, I didn't look up to see what his name is, but he probably does voices for 20 characters.
Wow.
So he does all these voices, and I'm not usually a fan of a man doing women's voices, and some of them he definitely struggles with, but it's amazing how good he is at making them distinguishable. He's
cool.
Very, very good at creating characters that I can recognize just by the way he's talking. So I think if you read the books, just, you know, in book form, you'll enjoy them. It's a great adaptation. They're just like entertainingly fascinating.
They sound really interesting. I'm going to have to read them.
So that's my recommendation. You should check out the Superpowered series by Drew Hayes.
We have a new review to read this week. This review is from Jemima917 from the United States. So good. 5 stars. I love this podcast and its fun and unique premise. Plus, the hosts are so entertaining.
Oh,
thanks, Jemima.
Thank you. We love that.
Yeah, that's really nice. So listeners, you should leave us a review and we will read it on air too.
Even if it's bad.
We love reviews.
We do.
That's our episode. Tune in next time for another 6 Degrees of Wiki. Keep up with us at 6degreesofwiki.com and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to let us know what you think.
Looking for early access to episodes and bonus content like bloopers? Go to patreon.com to become a 6 Degrees of Wiki patron and get discounts on merch or even help us choose degrees. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Do